Starting in 3, 2, 1. Fathom. Even if Nike donates millions to the Red Cross, or horrible human beings like Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell donate millions to UNICEF, they are not innocent. They have not corrected their wrongs. But when charities like these big organizations accept these kinds of donations, they legitimize these actors and make the public and the rest of the world forget the heinous acts that they have committed. 2 points of clarification before I go on to the 3-part case. First, we think we're talking about charities that are already successful. Red Cross, UNICEF, Doctors Without Borders. Meaning that A, money is not the most important factor. B, they have scalability in multiple regions around the world. And 3, it is their reputation that matters most because of the permits that governments allow them to operate. The volunteers they need for manpower in their operations. Secondly, how do we define immoral actors? 1, these are people who have actively committed undeniable harm, such as Nike forcing years of underpaid labor in the developing world, such as the Epstein case and the multitudes of women that were harassed by him. We think, secondly, the severity of the harm is extreme to the point that it is unquestionable that they are horrible human beings and that if the laws were there, they would deserve to be in jail. There is a 3-part case that everyone in this team must consider. First, why is association inherently immoral, even if it's a lot of money? Second, how does this harm the charity's cause per se? And thirdly, how do you encourage immoral actors to do worse? Before I move on, sure, closing.
So what is more immoral, stealing or killing a person?
I think they're both very immoral acts, and you should avoid both in any cases. Let's go to the first case. Why is association inherently immoral? 3 things. 1, we think you are using money that is collected and generated by oppression. We think Nike was able to accumulate those millions of dollars donated to Greenpeace and the Red Cross because they have underpaid people in the developing world. We think Epstein was able to get away with a lot of lawsuits and use that money for being able to donate and try to clean his name because of all of the horrible things that he has acted. And we think as a charity, whether or not you care particularly for the health of children or the well-being of women, we think that they understand that everyone has equal moral worth. And they are not gods to be able to decide whether or not the people they are helping have more worth than the other people in the very first place. So even in that POI, your case does not stand. But secondly, even if it's a lot of money and somehow you are strapped for money as one of the biggest institutions in the world, it is blood money that these people have no right to give and you have no right to spend. That's why association is inherently harmful. But secondly, and more importantly, I would argue that you delegitimize the voices of those hurt by these individuals, making it harder for them to get accountability, making it harder for them to sue, because the court of public opinion is on their side. When people see that when these people see like Nike has helped the developing world or helped the environment in the very first place. But thirdly, even if money is even incredibly important, or there's not that big of a moral quandary, we think that there's a multitude of other options, like millions of dollars in public donations, like other organizations such as governments, or even other multilateral organizations like the United Nations that is willing to give you money, and we think you have an obligation to choose a more moral action. That is why association is inherently moral in all instances. Let's move on to the second argument. How does this cause harm to the charities? No, thank you. Cause. 3 levels. 1, we think the public in general are less likely to support you. We think that they need public support, such as volunteers for homeless shelter charities, personnel for people managing operations or logistics for Doctors Without Borders. But when the public knows that you associate willingly with people that are sex offenders, people that hurt the developing world, people that fund things like private military corporations, they do not want that on their resume, but more importantly, they do not want that on their conscience. But secondly, and more importantly, even if it's a lot of money for the very instance, the very moral actor that they give, it will ultimately be a temporary amount of money. I think these horrible actors will only likely give $1 million in one sitting and not any more in the very first place. Well, the general public is likely to support you for the long term. That's why the trade-off is far more important in our side, and we need the kind of manpower that we get from them. Secondly, and more importantly, I would argue that you get less support from politicians and governments. We think a lot of these charities need permits and the permission of governments to operate in a lot of public spaces. But when politicians that are mostly progressive do not want to associate with these kinds of charities because they associate with very heinous actors, you've ruined that kind of scalability. You ruined that ability to operate in the public sphere of domain, and that makes it even harder for you to help people, help the homeless, help children in the developing world, and the like. But thirdly, and most importantly, I think people will be less willing to receive your help. We think, for example, in rural Korea, a lot of people are more willing to accept help or charity from churches compared to other corporations in the very instance. I think this example still applies to most cases like homeless shelters, because people have a lot of their own moral stances and believe that they do not want to continue to legitimize an organization that supports horrible people that hurt millions of others more in the very first place. So when people are less willing to receive your help, people are less willing to join your movement, that's how you hurt the cause entirely, that's how you harm a vast majority of people and harm the charity's cause. But before I move on, anything from opening?
So explain why these charitable organizations should prioritize just the perception of being moral over the actual utility of helping these people that they're primarily tasked to deal with.
It is not the perception of being moral. When you accept money from Epstein's family or Maxwell, when you accept money from Nike, we think you lessen the ability of your people to trust you. You lessen the ability to get volunteers. You lessen the ability to go into government spaces because people are less willing to give you that permission. So even if you have all of the money in the world, if people do not want to receive your help, if people do not want to work for your charity, you cannot help anyone. So utility is still worse off on your side. Let's move on to the last argument. How do you encourage these immoral actors to act worse? You would argue that even if more immoral actors call you out, even if they somehow spend their money for worse ways, or they spend their money to fund worse things, we think that you further enable them and to do the horrible things that they do right now. Two things. One, you enable them not to change, because it is easy for them to escape things like the court of public opinion. It is easy for them to believe that they are good people, and most of the time these are sociopaths that like to believe that they are doing good, and you legitimize that kind of behavior. That means it's easier for them to hurt people within their offices, to be able to underpay people in the developing world. But secondly, and more importantly, we think it is harder for the victims of these immoral actors to call out these people in the very first place, because the Red Cross has their backing, or the Red Cross makes it easier for them to clean their name. But thirdly, and more importantly, it is harder for these people to prosecute these immoral actors. Because in most cases, these kinds of cases are for example, character descriptions within the law of order, and makes it difficult for lawyers to be able to say that these are inherently bad people that should be put behind bars. That is what you enable further people to get hurt. That's why even if they spend it on worse things, even if they spend it on continuing doing the horrible things that they do, we think it is far easier to hold them accountable on our side, far easier for them to stop them from doing harm. For all these reasons and more, the motion stands. Thanks.
I thank the Prime Minister for that speech, and I would now like to welcome up the Leader of the Opposition. Here.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. A starving child in South Sudan could care less where the money comes from that makes their life tangibly better. The vulnerable actor in this debate, and the perspective from which the motion speaks, is purely utilitarian. Right? We think that side opening governments, the ontological argument, is nothing more than political grandstanding. Right? They are saying that their morality and their perceived morality supersedes the interests of people whose lives could be saved or materially improved by what these charities do. So, before I get to our three mechanisms of substantive matter and extraneous rebuttal, just quickly the weighing and trade-off in this debate. Firstly, notice how this debate is not really deontological, and not really about legitimacy. It's almost all about efficacy, so that's the metric that we have here. And in terms of the trade-off that we're willing to make, we're more than willing to be viewed as less moral if we can still be more helpful overall, right? We bite the harm of bad perception if we improve people's lives. So that's what we're willing to make, sure.
even if these charities are already so successful, as mentioned in the info site, aren't they already incredibly efficient and have all of the utility you want?
Yes, so just because these charities are already very successful doesn't mean that they can't become more successful. Like they could be great charities right now, but they could be, instead of saving 10,000 lives, they could be saving 10 million lives, right? So, just quickly want to tell you some extraneous rebuttal. We had 3 points coming from this side. Firstly, and like most irrelevant to the debate, is the idea that we legitimize immoral actors, right? So we need to ask, do we care more about the legitimacy of immoral actors or the vulnerable actors, right? The people whose lives can be saved by these charities, right? This motion is from the perspective of the charity. So general arguments about what is good in terms of general morality is irrelevant, right? If something is generally irrelevant, we think it is incredibly, it is a lot more important about what is good in the interest of this charity. Secondly, they tell us that association is going to be inherently harmful for these charities, right? And thirdly, they tell us that these charities are going to get less support from government and other donors, and that their workers are going to lose trust in them, right? And this clashes directly with the POI that we gave. I just want to flag you here, because our 3 substantive points and the 3 mechanisms that we provide in our positive matter clashes directly with this. Just briefly, we think that the incentives are a lot more plausible on our side. Like, people are going to donate and work for cancer research because they care about cancer, because they've lost family members to cancer. They care a lot less about who's making the donations, but more on that later. Just quickly a characterization of the duty, right? Like, we think that it's as a charity organization. That's the perspective of the motion. So a charity organization, right, in first interest is to be most effective, right? The conclusion here is that the motion is much more about efficacy than legitimacy, right? But secondly, and very importantly, your recipients are not going to object to getting donations from immoral actors, right? If you're a child starving in Africa, or if you're a person who's otherwise going to die from cancer because of a lack of research, you could care less who the money is coming from. We are the side for utility, we are the side for tangible, material benefits and improvements in someone's life. Right, so just quickly, a characterization, generally of these charities' interests. We think they want to do charity well in the moment, but most importantly, the characterization that we give you is that these charities want to be effective in the long term. These charities are only truly and meaningfully beneficial to society insofar as they can like sustainably work, right? It's not good enough to just help a couple of like kids right now. The nature of the problem that these charities deal with, whether it be starvation or healthcare in the developing world, or anything else, the nature of this problem means sustainable long-term work. And the only way you get that, right, is through like a lot of funding from like a broad range of actors, right? So, like, we are the side for sustainable long-term work. So, before I get onto the 3 mechanisms that mitigate efficacy on this side of the house, I'll take a point from closing.
Okay, so the Red Cross, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and like Amnesty International all fund malaria nets. How, as like a billionaire, do I decide which one to donate to?
Like, as a billionaire, you can, as a billionaire, to be very honest, you're probably going to be donating to the thing that's closest to your heart, right? The thing that you care about the most, right? Also, any harm that comes from that POI is actually an incredibly marginal harm, as I'll show in my positive matter. So firstly, just on utilitarianism, we're going to mitigate these arguments that come from this side of the house, that people, that these charities are not going to get as much funding and trust from their workers. Right, so firstly, characterization. People donating to charity. Why do people donate to charity? And this relates to that POI. People donate to charity because they care deeply about an issue. Mostly it isn't that people just care about like altruistically helping humanity at large. Those people are great, but that's not really the majority of the actor. They care deeply about an issue because it affects them or it affects their family members, or they are very interested in it, right? An example, right, like people donating to cancer research are often doing it because they've lost family members to cancer, right? So when they find out that like a corrupt politician is also a big donor for this cancer research organization, they don't really care, right? They care more about the utilitarian outcomes of actually like trying to get a sustainable cure for cancer than they care about anything else, right? That's the incentives, the more plausible incentives that we have on this side of the house. Second of the 3 mechanisms, no, right? Donors are rational people and can make the way up. A again, relating to the POI that we get from closing. So, when a donor thinks and says, okay, should I donate to this charity? Or when a government thinks, should I donate to this charity? Even though they might get some money from some immoral actors, right? They are rational and they can make the way up. And they can say, sure, I really don't like this actor, but you know what's much more important to me than my political grandstanding and my conscience is actually helping people that I care about. So, like, the donors are rational enough actors to make their benefit. 3, the third very most important mechanism that we have, right? Charities, we think that this debate is about charities that have proven to be effective. That's in the motion, right? Charities that have already been helping people. So we think the charities that we speak in the perspective from are the charities that are best placed to be making decisions. The context here is that many charities are like completely inefficient, have the wrong priorities, or run by the wrong people. The charity that we have here are the types of charities to create the most utility and the most benefit for the most people worldwide, right? So we want these charities to be the ones sustainably creating benefit in the long term because they are best placed and because they are much better than the alternative charities that aren't as effective. And for those 3 mechanisms, I'm incredibly proud to stand outside our position.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for that speech, and I would now like to welcome up the Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think a crucial mistake of opening opposition is to not recognize that oftentimes when people do immoral actions and earn money that way, that is also a way of hurting the most vulnerable individuals. That is, they don't reconcile with the fact that oftentimes you're hurting 100 people and then helping one person, but that doesn't reconcile the moral evil that they have been doing. That means that even if you buy the utilitarian principle that is coming from their side, if they cannot prove that these immoral actors are likely to be better under their side, they cannot win the debate. We've already proven why these immoral actors are going to do better. That being said, there are 2 main things I want to talk about in this round. The first thing is with regards to the effectiveness of charities. The first thing I want to do is I want to engage with opposition in their best ground. Let us assume, just for the sake of this debate, that money is the most important thing for the round. In that case, we think we are still winning. Why is that the case? There are 2 pieces of material that I want to give here. The first is that people are more likely to donate more under their side. And here's where I want to address the alt claim that people are usually very rational donors. We would argue that oftentimes there's a time trade-off in terms of donating, there's a money trade-off in terms of donating, and people oftentimes do want to just feel good in terms of the amount that they are donating, and therefore it is not likely that people are likely to be rational. But even if this were true to some extent, obviously some people are rational, other individuals are not, and they themselves claim that more donations is good, and therefore this kind of defeats their own argument. What is the claim under our side? Because people feel more galvanized as a result of the fact that you can have more faith in charities, that is, there's always some suspicion on behalf of individuals that charities are somehow in cahoots with the riches, and therefore you don't want to give money. These are the individuals that we can target to get more donations under our side of the house. That doesn't happen under their side. Secondly, we are also able to create allyship with individuals. That is, there are already individuals who want to do things like sue Epstein, who want to do things like sue Nike, who take stances against immoral actors. These immoral actors can be persuaded to donate to these charities when these charities take an active stance against the kinds of actors that individuals are trying to fight. I want to be clear, this is going to not just be more money, but oftentimes these actors that we get are more sustainable. Maddie has already given you the argumentation that the immoral actors are likely to be one-time donors because they want to donate to offset the things that they have done. What that then means is that we get more sustainable funding under our side. Even if this is less funding, this is critical for charities due to the fact that you can help people for longer periods of time as opposed to helping them once and then abandoning them for the rest of their lives. Before I go on further, I'll take one from closing.
So, your main argument in this debate is these charities are successful, thus we don't need the money from immoral actors. What is your structural analysis in this debate as to why they're getting their funding from other places and not immoral actors?
I just gave you the argumentation on who the people likely to donate are. I don't understand the relevance of that POI. The second thing I want to talk about in terms of the effectiveness of charities is the op argument that says, well, but money could be so useful. I want to be very clear here. Oftentimes, the issue with charities is not the lack of money. Sure, they get money in some way due to the fact that governments are already supporting them, for instance, and people already want to donate to these charities. The meaningful difference is being able to get that money somewhere and being able to help individuals. Things like manpower, things like human capital, things like getting permits. And we told you that you're unable to get that under their side of the house. Op says people are rational and people want to feel like they're helping individuals and therefore they're likely to do these kinds of things anyway. But the problem with this analysis is it doesn't reconcile with the fact that people obviously could be doing other things with their time and want to feel good about the fact that they're doing good things. We would say that we get more human capital under our side. We would say that given that that is the primary constraint on behalf of charities, this is the way to help more individuals. Before I go on further opening.
You talk about human capital and galvanization. Surely tangible progress by charity is more likely to inspire galvanization than some quabble about morality.
Yes, but that tangible progress doesn't have to be at the expense of other individuals. That is, these charities helping people with the money that they currently have is also a way to demonstrate tangible progress. There's not additional marginal benefits that you're getting under your side of the house. The final claim I want to make here, though, is in terms of the people who are receiving help. We argued from Maddie's speech that people are likely to receive, likely to reject help from these charities. The op claim here is that a starving child is not likely to care. This misses the point. That is, maybe there are some individuals who are likely to prefer their pragmatic gains from charities as opposed to moral principles. But the argument that we made is that there are individuals who care a lot about morality, and these are the individuals that you are losing out on. Therefore, their response doesn't actually address Maddie's claim. That is, there are individuals who, for things like consciousness reasons, who for things like religious reasons, or who for things like political reasons, are going to be unwilling to receive help from these charities. This also defeats them on their very ground, because if op says helping more individuals is important, you are incapable of helping these individuals. And I want to be very clear. People make these choices in terms of their trade-off all the time. That is, you sacrifice your ability to eat because you think your moral consciousness or your principles are important. This is already a revealed preference that individuals have, and you are actively abandoning these types of individuals. At the end, the effectiveness argument is very simple. We've already proven to you why charities are likely to be more effective under our side. They say effectiveness and being utilitarian is the most important metric. We are already winning on the opposition metric. The second thing I want to talk about is in terms of immoral actors. And I think this is the part where opposition doesn't engage sufficiently, where they just say, oh, immoral actors will just be immoral. I want to characterize two types of immoral actors. The first is those who want to change behavior and those who recognize that they need to change their behavior for certain reasons. I.e., corporations like Nike and Shell probably realize that they have had enough PR backlash such that they need to change their behavior. Then the question of this debate becomes, how is it that corporations are likely to change their behavior? The problem under their side is that charities allow these corporations to take the easiest way out. That is, you donate a chunk of your money, you don't really change your internal practices, and therefore you can get on with the way in which you currently implement your business practices. The meaningful difference under our side is that given that these corporations already realize that they need to change their behavior, you're more likely to encourage systematic changes in their behavior because you can't take the cop-out way out, or you can't take the cheapest way out. That means that on balance, things like business practices in the developing world, or things like environmental damages, are more likely to be improved under our side. I want to be very clear on what the trade-off is. Oftentimes, the reason why individuals are suffering and need help from charities is because of these immoral actors. That is, people are not being paid enough. People are suffering because of the fact that their land is being brewed. We would argue that we eliminate or at least decrease the need for individuals who need charities in the first place. What that essentially means is that we prevent even the opposition need to have it. The second type of corporations is those who don't want to change behavior, like people like Jeffrey Epstein. Maddie's already explained why it's easier to call them out. This also beats the op in terms of like what would people otherwise do. For all these reasons, extremely proud to be on opening government.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech, and I'd now like to welcome up the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Hear, hear, hear.
There's one basic mistake that OG makes in this whole debate. They fail to recognize that there is a power asymmetry between these charities and these corporations they're talking about. It is unreasonable to expect that you'll have any efficacy as a charitable organization when it comes to changing the business practices of these corporations or Jeffrey Epstein. There are a couple of structural reasons why this is the case. Luckily, they do give these reasons. They talk about like lawyers, economies of scales, multiple revenue streams. So that means you have the capacity to be able to shield yourself from any of the advocacy you might get from this charitable organization. Contrast this with the efficacy you have as a charitable organization when it comes to the projects that you're actually engaging. So there's a central principle undergirding what we're talking about here. Ought implies can. Your moral duty is proportional to your capacity to enact change. The degree of change you can enact when it comes to changing a corporation is not as much when it comes to the degree of change when it comes to the lives of people who have cancer, when it comes to the lives of people who want food and humanitarian aid. So we think that's where you have the strongest and heightened obligation when it comes to intervening in that instance. Notice also, the second mistake that OG makes in this debate is that they fail to recognize the perspective from which we're arguing this whole motion. We are the charitable organization. So they needed to analyze, they needed to tie all of their arguments about abuse to the actual incentive structure of a charitable organization. Like a lot of their stances is like neutral about why these practices are bad, but they didn't tie it back to the underlying incentive structure of a charitable organization. We do this in two ways. Firstly, we talk to you about why they prioritize efficacy, right? And secondly, I didn't tie myself. They didn't tie it to charitable organization. Thank you so much. Efficacy, right? That's the primary mandate that they want to achieve. But the second is long-term sustainability. So it's not enough, for example, for you to provide some aid in the short term now. In order for you to be an effective charitable organization, you need to sustainably provide aid that's going to help people in the long term. So the question is, under which side are you better able to achieve those outcomes? Because that is the direct interest in the incentive structure of these charitable organizations. So if we're able to prove that, I think we're winning this debate. So what does Franciscus tell you? And it goes like weekly responded. So they talk about like the people who donate, the people who care about these situations. They're the types of people who are likely going to donate irrespective of what stance these charitable organizations take. Why is this the case? Firstly, it's because of the nature of the issue you're investing in, right? So black people will donate to Black Lives Matter because they care about racial inequity, right? Humanitarian aid, for example, to Palestinian organizations with shallow ties to Hamas, right? That could be, for example, an example where the public might perceive you as being slightly immoral, but the people who donate to you, the people who care about it, are unlikely to change the mind as a consequence of this policy. Yes?
People are actively being hurt by corporations like Nike and abusive politicians. Why don't they count in your utility computation?
Okay. So, remember when I said ought implies can? I said you have the greatest efficacy when it comes to solving the issues that you are primarily tasked with, and your degree of efficacy when it comes to changing a corporation is marginal in comparison to that. So that's why that POI doesn't stand in today's debate. But secondly, I want to give another moral and principled point, and here I want to say is that there's no like a priori justification of what issues you should care about more. Like, so for example, climate change versus like activism for gender-based violence. It is principally okay for you to say that I care more about improving the situation when it comes to women in South Africa for gender-based violence, even if it's going to come at the cost, for example, that like a corporation who is in charge of who is responsible for making climate change worse is, dumping or doing all of those practices that end up making the situation worse. So the reason why that is the case is because as human beings, there is no objective way in which we could prioritize social issues, right? That is why we allow people to create internal hierarchies for themselves, because we think people ought to have that subjective mechanism of achieving what they want in their lives and to prioritize causes they want. So we think in principle it is justified for people to say, I'm willing to take the hit, that I'm going to donate to this organization in spite of the fact that some of their practices are unethical, if it means that there's going to be more efficacy in regards to the issue that I care about. Yes?
Please engage with the fact that charities are competing with each other. There's not one charity for every category of thing. When you're deciding which of two charities of the same cause to donate to, you probably pick the one that seems more like it's going to look good and isn't immoral.
No, you probably will pick the one that has the most efficacy because you care more about the actual cause. So I'm going to choose the one that's going to have more racial justice, for example. I'm going to pick the one that's going to lower gender-based violence in comparison to the one that appears like they care more about the issue and they're being more immoral. I think that's fairly intuitive. Now, let's talk about the deontological principle, the idea that you are perceived as being immoral. Why do we think that doesn't matter? Two reasons. The first is because by definition, you are saying that your moral concerns supersede the interests of the people you're trying to help, right? You're saying that, for example, we need to care about us being perceived by the public as being moral over the fact that there are people who could potentially benefit more by you accepting the money from this immoral this immoral corporation, for example. But the second thing is that we think that you ought to prioritize charity pursuits because that is your primary mandate as a charitable organization, right? You are tasked with dealing with charity first, and then you have to deal with public perception after. So we think in terms of priorities, you ought to forego your perception of being good if it means that you are able to be more efficacious in regards to your charitable pursuits, right? So that's why we think that the deontological principle doesn't stand, and that's why we think utility supersedes it. Now, what I want to do is give I'll take one more PI actually.
Sure. Do you think that Palestinians would feel comfortable donating to a pro-Palestinian charity that was backed by Benjamin Netanyahu?
So I think, again, it goes back to efficacy, so it depends on the extent to which they care about the cause, right? So another thing that I want to say, and I want to deal more with this Jeffrey Epstein point because I think it's quite important, and here I'm going to deal more with OG's material. So here they were talking about association being immoral. So there are a couple of responses here. The first is that they have a really naive characterization of the populace. So for example, with Jeffrey Epstein, like he had associations with like Harvard professors, for example, and like people like Lawrence Krauss, for example. But that didn't mean that like people suddenly thought that Harvard was like a shitty institution or something like that. People were able to delineate the difference between receiving money from an individual and that person being able to influence the practices of that organization. So we think people are able to see the difference because all you're doing is getting money here. It's not like they're giving you ideas about how to conduct your charity organization. So people can make that calculus. But the second thing we want to say here is that even in the instance in which you're perceived as being immoral, it's likely that the people who will be angry at you are not the people who are donating anyways. So we think the degree of harm that you are getting there is fairly marginal, and we think the people who would care are the people who would ask the question, is it likely that you're going to be less efficacious, or you're going to prioritize other things as a consequence of those donations, and we don't think that's going to happen under our context, and that's why we prioritize this.
I thank the DLO for that speech, and now I'd like to welcome up the government member. Here.
Three things to this extension. First, I'm going to be talking about the counterfactual and why I don't actually think it's the case that this money is no longer going to be used to help people. Then I'm going to talk about why this likely restricts the behavior of your charity in a meaningful way that limits your ability to like act in the ways that you want to and do good in the world. And then we'll talk about a better comparative of like the funding you could get and why the volatility that you have on our side is probably like, on off is destructive to your charitable goals. So firstly, on the counterfactual. If you want to rehabilitate your image as like a billionaire with a donation, your charity is probably not special in your ability to do this. And likely, what is going to happen when you reject this donation is that they will go elsewhere to a very similar charity, right? This is probably going to be a charity that underwent a very comparable vetting process to whatever led them to you. So to the extent that they found a charity that is like highly utilitarian, the second choice is probably also going to be highly utilitarian. There's like no real reason to believe otherwise, right? There are two implications of this. Firstly, the delta on human suffering that could be alleviated with this money is probably negligible, right? Children in Sudan are still probably good. They'll just be helped by a different charity that this billionaire ends up giving their money to. Secondly, the delta on rehabilitation of their image is also marginal, since the public probably doesn't actually give a shit which charity they're giving to when they change their view of this person's image. So like, when they see like, Bill Gates donates $1 million to a malaria organization, they don't know which organization it is. They're just like, oh, that's like nice, right? So to the extent that you think it's like unethical to like, help them rehabilitate their images, it's probably not much of a difference. We also, because we don't even know that you're most efficient, if you think there's like any chance that the alternative could also be quite good, then I think anything there is a wash. I'll take a point from the back up.
What are your structural reasons in this debate for charities having to opt in with the absolute worst immoral actors and not choosing average immoral actors to work with?
What? I mean, so I think that will come, so yeah, I assume it's not really related to what I said, but I think it's probably based on like the arguments that we're going to come up with, and I think generally it's based on like public perception. So for example, someone that like, I don't know, like litters or something, or like doesn't donate as much as they possibly could, or is like unethical in like marginal ways, is not going to cause mass public backlash when they like donate to your charity, right? Like, Like someone that's like kind of a dick giving you money is like probably not going to be much of a news story, and like I think all of the publicity stuff we'll talk about is just mitigated there, which is probably where the line is. Okay, so on restriction of behavior, I would say that there is likely either direct or indirect restriction to the way you're able to act as a charity when you accept this money. Why is this true? There are two reasons. So one is that often when people with like immoral intentions or billionaires, whatever, give money to charities, it comes with specific restrictions on how that money can be spent that are directly like given when they give the money. So they say this money is earmarked for very specific programs you offer within your charitable organization, or it's contingent on certain things. Like if you're a medical charity, that you no longer provide abortion services. Right? This is something that's literally happened before, i.e. like under the Harper administration, Canadian money that was given to like foreign charities doing medical work were contingent on them not doing abortion, which directly led to tons of charities no longer offering those services for people. But even in the cases where that, why is this likely the case? Often when rich people are donating, it actually isn't out of the kindness of their heart. Typically the people that amass the kinds of money to be donating en masse to these charities in ways that matter, i.e. if this is like about a $50 donation, we probably don't really care that much either way. So probably this is like the scope of where the debate is happening most clearly, in a second. Then their goals, they've probably amassed this money unethically, and generally their concerns are going to be based on similar things. So, i.e., how can I rehabilitate my images in a way that's good for my company? How can I push my agenda in a way that's directly good for my business, etc.? Which means the ability they have to push your charity into their own interests is probably quite high and often directly antithetical to your own interests. I think even if they do not come with like direct restrictions on what you do, i.e. they don't say we will necessarily withhold this money if you don't do X, Y, or Z. Often there are implicit things that you feel that you can't do. So if you know that you're heavily funded by like an ultra like conservative donor, and you're a medical charity, for example, you probably are not going to feel super comfortable now offering like contraceptive services if you believe there's like a legitimate risk because that is going to cause a mass withdrawal of funding from that person, right? So I think, see like for example universities being like obscenely hesitant to change like super racist sports teams' name because they know that they're like donors that will not want them to do that. It's like actually fucking crazy. And moreover, even if at some point in the future, and this comes to like volatility, you decide that in fact you've fucked up, right? You're like, we realize that we really would like to be able to provide abortion services or whatever, or something that goes against this person's interest, you now no longer can. Why is that the case? I think that even if you, at some point, reject this person's money, your image is scarred forever anyways, right? People will still see you as the charity that accepted money from like, you know, some like ultra-conservative anti-abortion person. I think my example about like a Zionist charity accepting money from Benjamin Netanyahu is particularly clear. Like sometimes the immoral actions of a donor are so bad or so antithetical to your organization's goals that likely anyone that would be in favor of you switching courses is never going to be willing to donate in the future. What this means is that your ability to like pivot or make changes is heavily mitigated in a world where you accept money from people because often your image is scarred in a permanent way. I'll take back half once again.
Okay, so how is this actually going to work? How are they going to control you? When are they going to control you?
So I literally gave two mechanisms. One of which was that they directly say, if you like don't do X, Y, or Z thing, we will stop giving you money. That's direct control. Indirect control, when you say, when you think that they probably would do that, right? Like I think this is like very clear, happens all the time in charitable goods. But also, I think the perception of it is also bad, right? So there's a reason why the perception of impropriety is the standard for things like judges being like, you know, recusing themselves from cases, even if they're not actually impartial, even if they could actually be impartial. Because public trust in the charity and the belief that they're controlled by that individual, it makes a big difference on whether or not governments are willing to act with them. So next extension on the comparatives of funding and where like trade-offs exist. So OG says you lose trust in governments and community. It fails to recognize this on two levels that I'm going to try to add. So if you're a very good actor, it's unclear why this donation is going to be the tipping point on public trust. And B, there's a failure to mechanistically weigh this trust on the value of the donation. So we're going to solve this in two ways. Why is this uniquely going to cause accountability that's bad for you? We think there's a recent trend of examining finances of organizations from charities to political parties, and a specific recent history of distrust in charities, i.e. when the Red Cross recently during the earthquake in Haiti spreads disease in Haiti through mismanagement of money and spends more money putting their workers in resorts than building homes, there's a unique sensitivity to the morals of charities and their ethics when governments are choosing whether or not to allow them into their own infrastructure and hospitals, which means we think it is uniquely likely that when you get massive news stories about Jeffrey Epstein donating to organizations, the degree of scrutiny and the mud you're going to be dragged through is uniquely high, uniquely likely to cause issues. I think the reason then why this is specifically bad is that it leads to like volatility in where you're allowed to like pivot. Because you've taken money from this person, even if it's bigger than the money you lose out in public when people distrust you, even if there is a weighing there, the reason you should weigh the public more is that they're less volatile. I.e., the odds that this person goes to prison because they find out that they're like, they get Jeffrey Epstein, I guess, whatever, means that you like lose all that money and now you're screwed. Whereas the public or governments are probably more stable in their ability to give money, which means you can invest in more long-term projects without worrying that the funds get completely like pulled out, which means you can do more good even if the money is smaller because it's more stable. I think this means that you're able to like last longer in the future and do more good on that. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
I thank the government member for that speech, and I'd like to welcome up the opposition member. Here.
Sorry. Haven't written on papers in about a year and a half. Are we ready to start? Okay, just do the PO, I think. I'll take one from OG around the 3rd minute, I'll take one from CG around the 5th. Let's keep that good practice from online debate. Okay, so starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, if we lived in a perfect world, Prop would win any day of the week. If we lived in a perfect world where we had all the resources, where we did not have to cooperate with immoral actors to do good things, absolutely they win the debate. The unfortunate reality is, however, that a large chunk of this money is going to come from immoral actors, and if we do not cooperate with these people, we're going to lose a lot of revenue stream, and firstly, potentially risk our existence and losing out our capacity against other charities, but secondly, not have the ability to help people. All drive a defensive claim in this debate, where they say people are irrational, thus they'll continue donating. But they never explain why this particular money and saying no to it is going to be very bad. We're going to give you 4 mechanisms as to why this money is a large chunk of it, and thus saying no to it is going to lead to immense harms. Let's get into these 4 mechanisms. Firstly, the first reason that I'm going to give you is that most people either firstly do not have limited resources to donate or have easy access to say no to donating. Let's start with the second. Why is it easy to say no to donating? Firstly, you can always say to yourself and to other people that you have other more proximate interests towards you, like paying off your mortgage, like taking care of your family, like saving up money and living a good potential life, or that circumstances for you are bad as well. Maybe you're an African American living in the United States and you shouldn't give money to people living in Africa or in Eastern Europe, where we are from, for example. But also, notice that there are other competing factors within you that drive this sort of thing. Potential risks of the uncertainty of the future, etc. But also other narratives in society telling you, oh, it's okay to prioritize yourself, nobody owes you anything, you had a bad life, etc. And these are very easy for people to access. This, by the way, directly responds to the OG claim about increasing revenue streams because it's likely to not increase. But secondly, the people that donate are static in this debate because they have strong personal reasons to donate symmetrically. They really believe in this particular cause, or they want the tax break from donating and doing this particular thing, so there's not likely to be a delta and it's very limited. But secondly, notice that the large chunk of the population has limited resources to donate. Notice that many people aren't very rich. Like there's, like at best you have middle class people who have so many expenses right in their life. They have like mortgages, they have like, how do you say, send their children to college and pay the huge tuition fees that exist in this country, etc. So they actually have legitimate concerns not to give money. What is the comparative? The comparative is that these rich people have a lot of money, unfortunately. That capitalism structure pushes people up and allocates the resources above towards these individuals, but also they have strong incentive to give money. They, for example, may have moral guilt that they have done something bad in the past and like to compensate in the future. But also, like they want, like the thing that's talked about in this debate, they want to fix their image, but maybe it could be a passion project for them. Maybe they do immoral things, but they're very passionate about cancer research, etc. Or these type of things. So they do have the capacity for this. Secondly, notice that you have, like as CG conceived, by the way, in this debate, you have competition from other charities in this particular case. So they're more like, and notice that this is from the perspective of a single charity. The other charities are not doing this in this particular debate. That means that these, how you say, these sharks that exist in these particular ways will go to these people, take this money. So most likely you're going to lose out on these particular this. In this moment, if you don't receive this money, you lose, how you say, your marketing capacity. You lose your capacity to be recognized in society and to do all of these things. So it's a very big harm. Third reason, there's likely to be black swan event. Like for example, COVID crisis hitting and people all of a sudden not having money to donate. Or 2008 economic crisis. They're always booming bust. Crisis is happening all the time, which limits the capacity of these individuals to donate. The rich people are not susceptible to these crises. They have large currency reserves and they're able to do this, etc. Before I get into the fourth reason, which is the most important one, OG.
Apologies, but this is empirically false. The Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, and UNICEF have been operating for decades, even during the financial crisis, even during COVID.
Okay, let me respond.
Really still
Okay,
need that money.
look. Here's the important thing. They assert that just because you're successful, you're not taking money from immoral actors. Here is the fourth reason, and it's the most important one. Structurally, most rich actors are going to be immoral. Firstly, because capitalism pushes you to do immoral things, because corporations have to have margins that they have to compensate. That's why they're having factories in the developing world which pollute individuals. You also have to do other immoral acts in yourself. Like how do you say, if everyone around you is basically doing drugs and doing other immoral things, you have to do it with them because it's basically like, how do you say, a code in these particular cases. But also notice that bad practices are inherent to you receiving money in these particular ways. You're not able to do this. So they may say, Red Cross an example. The other 1,000, how do you say, charities are examples from our side of the house. So this like to the case. Why is this harmful? Firstly, in order to exist as a charity, in order to, how do you say, have the infrastructure, like for example, transporting goods to these sorts of places, or having simple things like accountants, like lawyers, like all of these things that are necessary for your existence, you need to have a stable cash flow in this sort of thing. So far as we proved to you that the other cash flow is unstable, and it's likely to be less, this literally means that your existence or your capacity to do this sort of thing is, how do you say, likely to be limited. You may not exist in the coming future of doing this sort of thing. This presupposes any moral action that you're doing in this debate because your existence is the necessary thing to do this. But secondly, if you don't have money, I'm sorry, but you cannot help the people. Yes, volunteers are important, but being able to buy malaria nets and save other people's lives, or beds, or send them to Ukraine, or like buying trucks and doing all of these sort of things is the necessary precondition towards these sort of things. So even if you get more volunteers, if you have no money to execute the operations in this particular thing, you're not likely to do this. Before I get into the final comparative with this debate,
Tons of NGOs are like heavily funded by like government grants that give money that easily rivals like billionaires and stuff. It just isn't categorically true as your only big source of funding.
So this is the second reason that comes from OGCG cannot let me respond to it. Firstly, governments have limited resources too. They have to spend on things like healthcare, transportation, infrastructure, etc. They're not likely to do this. But secondly, governments are so very problematic in picking charities, right? They have to do things like political saving, political connections and these type of things, which is very problematic. So it's not like for them to resort. So here I respond to their reason. But final piece of framing that really deals with a large point of this. We don't have to cooperate with the most immoral actors, right? Like, the fact is that so far we have been built as an infrastructure. Yes, we have to cooperate with some immoral actors, but not the worst, right? Like, we're fairly built up, we can still cooperate with some of them, but we don't have to do this. Why is this the case? Firstly, you still have bargaining power, right? You are giving them a service with this sort of thing. You're increasing their marketing, so you're likely to still have, like, say, conditions when you're doing this particular case, when you're cooperating with them. But secondly, and here CG's only reason is, but they will go to another charity, etc. Firstly, going to another charity is symmetrical in the debate, as we already proved them. But secondly, it's worse on their side of the house. And why is this the case? Because if you think of, hold on, let me give you a second here. Okay, forget this reason. Final thing in this sort of thing. They run also a moral claim in this debate. The response is coming from OGS, we should care about utility, etc. You prioritize the concrete cause which you're giving money to, not other causes that exist in this sort of thing. This is why you're a charity specializing in one thing. Even if they, or you yourself as judges, like the examples that they give in this debate, this charity cares about the only thing which is funding. We prove to you that they don't have the money for this CO.
I thank the opposition member for that speech, and I would now like to welcome up the government work. Here.
Take me like a hot second to set up these notes. I apologize. Jeff Bezos' wife, and I apologize, it's really unfeminist of me to not know her name, has donated over $9 billion to charity since she divorced Bezos. I don't think all of this is from like the goodness of her heart or that she's necessarily only looking at what is most efficient. It is a mix of optics and the things that you care about. Insofar as we are the team, through POIs and our speech, who have set up the actual comparative in this round, which is one, the nonprofit industrial complex exists and charities are competing against each other. Two, you are a specific charity, so you probably care about being the optically superior charity when you're looking for these massive and minor donations. I don't really remember what the third one was. I think that you, in terms of your own benefit, have an advantage of being the kind of good star charity that people flock to. Oh yeah, the third one was that charities aren't maximally efficient, which means charities are sometimes competing in the same fields of areas. I.e., I can't name the single charity that gives malaria nets because tons of them do. So you probably don't just have like the framing of you pick the thing that you care about because you're still deciding which of those charities to donate through. I would say if you're the average donor and you see a headline that says Red Cross associated with terrible actor, you probably say, oh, there's probably another malaria net charity that I can donate to, let me switch my donations. If you're a philanthropist who's trying to look good, who's trying to maximize the way that you are perceived as well as kind of how well you are doing, I think that you say, okay, let's pick the one that also aligns with the image I'm trying to convey of the world. If you are a billionaire like Bezos, or even like a rich actor who wants to associate with climate change activism, you pick the climate change activist organization that is going to make you look good, that is going to get you public support, that will get you retweets for that donation, not the one that's going to get you ratioed because it's associated with a terrible actor. A few quick questions to like clarify the debate. I think we're a little bit messy, especially on the front half. And then we're going to kind of like walk through the round in terms of how people decide to donate, and like why we care about like both the amount of money but also the sustainability of money, and why only Jacob explains that to you in a meaningful way. First, POI from OG.
Okay, so there's no fiat that these other charitable organizations are going to be as efficacious. This debate's just about this particular one. Why are they structurally going to be as efficacious as the one we're talking about in this debate?
Okay, two important things to know. One, nothing in the model tells us, or nothing in the motion tells us you are the most efficacious charity to begin with, right? I can't tell you if the Red Cross, or Doctors Without Borders, or Amnesty International are more efficacious than each other. I can also not tell you which of those organizations we are as the charity. So OO pins its entire case on being the most efficient charity, but never explain to us why you are likely to be the most efficient charity. They're already out of debate. Second of all, if you're trying to seem more, if you're unsure if you will be the most efficient, we would tell you should probably spin optics and be at least the most morally consistent so that you can cling on to that area of donation interest. Okay, so first, a few quick questions. One, who are the immoral actors that we're talking about? Because CO seem confused about this. Okay, I think the OG model is pretty clear, right? We're not talking about people who kind of suck, who say maybe a problematic joke on TV. We're talking about people who would be objectively terrible actors who have probably done things that have been massively harmful to society. We're not talking about Jeff Bezos' wife or most philanthropists in the world, right? We still think that you have tons of actors to choose from when you're getting donations, and no one proved to us otherwise, right? So the question is, from these immoral actors, are they giving enough of your money to counterbalance all the philanthropists, major billionaires, and governments? CO never explains to us why. They just try to paint everyone as immoral and tell us that that means that you're going to lose your funding. Two, who do you need money from? Three actors and why we win on all three of them. First, in terms of minor donors. Okay, so note that minor donors, in terms of percentage of donations, give way more to your charities than billionaires. This matters because it allows you to fund specific programs in sustainable ways, right? So for example, you'll often have organizations that say, hey, we need to make sure that we are giving vaccines to this entire country by 2025, and you need to make sure that you have enough people donating $20 a month or $50 a month to sustain that program in a way in which you can plan out your funding and plan out the delivery of those services. If you are worried about the immoral actor that you associate with creating a headline that makes everyone pull their funding, you are not able to reliably like design that program, figure out how to implement that program, and you're not only leaving people behind, you are probably going to actually reduce like your ability to run as a charity because you are not sustainable. Only Jacob gives you that mechanism. I will give OG credit for like saying the thing about public perception, but it's only mechanized in terms of how people react in Jacob's speech. Secondly, philanthropists and other companies. Actually, first I'll take a POI from Sofia.
Yeah, so we give you structural analysis as to why most companies or like donors are going to be immoral due to the nature of capitalism. They provide zero reasoning as to why most of the people aren't immoral, thus they concede an enormous part of the debate and they don't get their money on their side of the house.
Okay, I'm just gonna like say in a round, I think the OG model is something that we should all follow. If it was going to be disputed, it should have been disputed, and like a point of clarification in the first speech. I think it is fine to say that we're talking about particularly terrible actors and that we're not talking about like most government organization or most philanthropists. I would say even in CEO's best case, in which like most billionaires are immoral because they're upholding capitalism. By the way, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism anyway. I would say then you still are able to optimize the ways in which people favor you as the only moral actor in the debate, and we talk about that in a minute. So secondly, in terms of philanthropists and other companies and how they perceive you, right? So recognize you are a charity and you're competing against a bunch of other charities in terms of perception. We don't know who's the most efficient. We don't know who like that billionaire might pick. They might just eeny, meeny, miny, moe it. But if you're the one who explicitly rejects immoral actors, all of the people who want to be associated with morality, all the people who want to align themselves with being perceived as good, the actors who want to make sure that they're revamping their career, the philanthropists who want to seem like they are actually in line with like positive things, the politician who wants to go to your fundraiser and help you raise money, are all going to flock to you and pick you because you are exclusively rejecting those immoral actors. So it gives you an exclusivity that you cannot have in the off world. Thirdly, in terms of government grants, I think Jacob already recognized to you the sustainability argument. So quickly then, in terms of the amount of money that you get on balance, right? So the case that we get from OO is basically the one of like, you're the most efficient. I think that's already out of the debate. The case that we get from CO is basically, immoral actors will go elsewhere, so that's problematic to you. First of all, this cuts out the principle of the round, which I think is actually good for us, right? It says like people like probably get money going to like starving children on both sides. The question is, what do you as a charity care about? We would say you as a charity care about the exclusivity of what you are doing and not hanging your hat on an immoral actor who will make the headlines because of what Jacob told you, which is, sorry, we're in a cancel culture in which people are actually exposing actors and willing to pull out both as minor and major donors because they don't want the association. Proud to propose.
Just checking if I speak English. All right. 3, 2, 1. Firstly, on a principle, pretty much what they said is, well, these are blood money, right? I have two responses to this. Firstly, if you're talking about blood money, probably millions or more than millions of people who are actually employed by these companies who are getting blood money are also having the same blood money. So by the extension of your principle, almost any actor would be essentially immoral and you would not be able to choose from anybody. But secondly and most importantly, let's talk about competing moral obligations. In fact, yes, it is bad to delegitimize some actors, but it is also much worse when you're in a unique position to make effective change in society, to disregard that. Because every cent that you're not allowing to go into your reserves is the ability for you to change somebody's life. And it's not only your ability, you have the specific unique ability because you already have the structure, you already have the know-how, you already know how to do it compared to many others who don't, which means that you're effectively not making that change. Now let's see what OG says on this. Yes, but for every 10 people that you help, you basically not help 100 ones because you're supporting this blood money, right? Well, what is the mechanism for this, right? How exactly do you change these companies? How exactly do you have the bargaining power to do so? To this day, the European Union is trading 60% of its gas with Russia, even while people in Ukraine are dying. This is because actors are, in many of the cases, unable to enact effective change onto other bigger actors than them, which would mean that they're in a position which disallows them to do anything about it. And you cannot really prove in this debate that a certain NGO is going to basically make a multi-billion-dollar company change its practices, which are in fact led not only by this company being immoral, but also by the market that it derives from. Because if this company becomes more moral and subdues to your conditions as an NGO, other companies would go in its place and do the immoral things, such as, for example, like, I don't know, British Petroleum versus OPEC countries, or things like that. I don't think this exists in this debate, and it's not really proven that even if they can change, how are they going to change, and to what extent those conditions apply? Which means that these conditions, in their best case scenarios, are effectively minimal compared to the ability for you to change people's lives, because you know how you're already doing it. Now, on a public opinion before that.
Yeah, immoral actors realize they need to fix their behavior due to things like public backlash or perception. What is preferable, them being pushed to change behavior such that people are less oppressed, or giving that money to charity on a one-off?
Okay, so look, in terms of public opinion, I have a couple of responses here. The first is, in terms of public opinion, we have to talk about a couple of important things. Firstly, information fatigue. Everything is happening in the world right now. So it's very hard for you to basically explain to me that like people are, because they're donating right now to this charity, are going to only care about this and not care about another issue. Second of all, in terms of the ability of these people to donate, Roman already proved to you, gave you structural reasons as to why these money are not key. So even in the worst case scenario, we're okay with losing some funds from public opinion because we're able to actually maintain the big cash flow from these companies and actually change people's lives, which in the long term is much better. But apart from that, I think that, and this is directly a response also to CG's claim, which is that basically these donators are going to have huge control over what you do as a charity. A couple of responses here. Now, firstly, you're in a unique position in terms of bargaining power because you're the only one who knows how it's really how to run a successful NGO. Second of all, you can kind of do both, right? You can do a sleazy campaign, but also help people on the ground and use a lot of the other money to do good without actually making active harms. But thirdly, there are accountability mechanisms in place. If you're doing bad things, and the people who is giving you money know this, investigative journalists are going to come after you. Competitors are going to come after you in terms of other NGOs. Politicians might come after you when they hear all of those things. So basically you know that you're not only going to like completely turn into a bullshit machine that doesn't actually help people before that closing.
Okay. So we don't know which charity you are, right? You're probably not the McKinsey of the charities, right? But BCG rejects ICE is able to have a lot more environmental people who come in to get consulting from them that otherwise would view themselves as too separate from the immorality of McKinsey. You get exclusive clientele, you're able to distinguish yourself, and that allows for more sustainable development where you don't get canceled because you're taking donations from an immoral actor and it makes the headline.
Okay, look, again, we already told you, you can have multiple sponsors, you can have multiple companies supporting you, and you don't have to get supported by the worst ones. As I asked in my first PY in this debate, it is equally immoral by the definition of the word, and OG agrees with that, to kill somebody and to steal from somebody. But we agree that one is much worse than the other. Thus, we are okay with taking from the stealers, but not from the killers, in order to at least make some adjustment to our scenarios. Now, moving on in terms of basically CG, in terms of like actually public opinion and all these people, it's also important to understand that they're also a lot volatile, right? Because right now, for example, everyone is talking about Ukraine. That means that thousands and thousands of other NGOs are not able to compete for marketing and basically media presence to actually talk about their stuff. Which means that there are many situations in which you need to have a stable cash flow in order to survive in these situations where just the public opinion goes up there or in other places, and it's not okay to actually continue relying on public support in many of these cases, even if people actually want it, which Rumena explained to you that in many of the cases they don't or they can't. And this is essential for this NGO's ability to exist and to make effective change in society. Okay, now I think lastly, what we wanna tell in this debate is that the crucial part is actually being able to sustain yourself and to effectively make the change you want. And as they're unable to prove that you are able to have the money and you are able to obtain any type of principle in this debate, we're the ones who prove to you that NGOs have to choose at least the better of two worsts.